I'm talking because Ed's kind of tall, so I'm standing on my tippy toes. Sounds good. Yeah, he'll probably, hopefully he doesn't like, I'll tell him it's better to talk here, not like eat the mic.
4 to 6 inches. If you get too close, it starts making a static
Yeah,
sound.
yeah. So here's good. You can hear me fine, right?
Everything about the
Yeah.
Is that me? Ooh, hello, politics
Probably right about here, right?
and journalism.
Kind of hold your chest, and then once they actually start talking, I'll come out and I'll probably have to adjust it. Okay. But, just go ahead and say hi, hello.
Hello, testing.
Okay, number 2. And would be.
Yeah.
All right, go ahead.
Me? Or is it you? That sounds like it's me, actually.
Should I shift
Good?
over and do that one?
Sure.
There.
Wait,
Yeah,
I'm
there you
talking
go.
now, and it's working, and I'm talking, and it's
Keep talking.
and it's working, and I'm talking, and it's like I'm so excited.
Good.
Fine. All right, Julie.
Oh, and I'm good? Okay, let me just keep talking.
Number 2.
Yep.
Shout
Okay,
out
yep,
to the
sounds
live
good.
stream watching
Yeah.
this test.
Hello, everyone. Go here.
Number 4.
All right,
is-
cool.
Does that have a 12 on the box?
No.
On the mic, does it say 12?
Mine says 2, yours says 3.
Okay, 3 is fine.
Okay.
And all right, 3. It should be on.
Hello, number 3.
All right,
Test,
12
test.
should be the last one.
Hello,
Awesome, just let it load.
testing.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3.
Doing great. Thank you.
Live.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Ed Wasserman, the Dean of the Graduate School of Journalism here. You know I'm the Dean because I've got the tie on. I want to welcome to this terrific event. We're bringing together a distinguished panel of Washington press corps' finest. The timing couldn't be better for this dispatch from the front. It's kind of like getting a medical update on a patient with a slow-motion stroke. Science. I want to recognize some of the campus's loyal supporters who are here today: Jonathan Logan, Bob Bishop, Susan Chamberlain, Nadine Tang. Thank you for your continued support. Naturally, I want to thank our panelists, Carl Hulse, Jake Sherman, Paul Kane, and our own Lynn Sweet, an alum of the Journalism School. All of them will be properly introduced in a moment by the person who conceived of this panel and brought it together, a hero of mine, Maureen Orth. And I want to tell you a little about Maureen. She is an award-winning journalist. Her career began as one of the first women writers at Newsweek. We know her now as a special correspondent for Vanity Fair. She's profiled everyone from Vladimir Putin and Angela Merkel to Bruce Springsteen and Taylor Swift, as well as researching and writing groundbreaking pieces on Woody Allen and Michael Jackson. Among others, her work includes a best-selling cover for National Geographic on the Virgin Mary. This was a tough interview to get. I was particularly impressed by the quote she got from Mary's son. Maureen's best-selling book, Vulgar Favors, about the murder of Gianni Versace, has become the subject of a 10-episode series on FX's Emmy Award-winning American Crime Story. And her other book, The Importance of Being Famous, Behind the Scenes of the Celebrity Industrial Complex. Maureen is a political science graduate of UC Berkeley and also a graduate of UCLA in journalism and documentary filmmaking. She serves as a trustee of the UC Berkeley Foundation on the college and trustee of the College of Letters and Science. Now, interestingly, since 2005, Maureen has embarked on a new career as a philanthropist after first helping build her namesake public school, Escuela Marina Orth, as a Peace Corps volunteer in Medellin, Colombia. She returned to Colombia in 2005 to found two nonprofit foundations, and in 2015, Colombian President Juan Manuel Santos, awarded her the Order of San Carlos, Colombia's highest civilian honor. Refugees International also awarded her the McCall Perpetual Humanitarian of the Year Award. Today, the Marina Orth Foundation serves 21 schools, and each primary school student has his or her own laptop through the One Laptop Per Child program. The foundation's next challenge, an ambitious plan drafted by Bloomberg Philanthropies to create new forms of blended learning to improve the teaching of English in Colombia and, if successful, throughout Latin America. We're very proud to consider Maureen Orth one of our own, very pleased to welcome her here tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, Maureen Orth.
Wow. Thank you for such a generous introduction. I'm always thrilled to come back to Cal. I just couldn't smell the eucalyptus tonight because it's a little cool outside, but that's usually one of my favorite things to do, and to hear the campanile, it just brings back so many great memories. Anyway, I'm very excited about our panel tonight because not only are these among the very most respected and best liked on both sides of the aisle journalists, they're also a lot of fun and they kind of get it. So I'm going to start by introducing them. Carl Hulse is the New York Times chief congressional correspondent. And I actually know him because he's a drummer in a rock band called the Native Makers. And he also writes a column on Washington and edits First Draft for what everybody should be reading in the morning from the New York Times. And how long have you been on the Hill, Carl?
Since 85.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, 1985. next to Carl is our most junior member, but that doesn't mean
We actually call him Junior now.
very, very fast rising. However, Jake Sherman is a senior writer at Politico and the co-author of Playbook, which is absolutely essential reading every single morning for anybody who purports to be at any grade pay level in Washington. They have to start with Playbook. And Jake is also an avid, this is what gives him credibility at Cal, he's an avid Fish fan and also Grateful Dead fan.
Huge. Huge. Thank
He's
you.
a graduate of George Washington University, and I should have said Carl's a graduate of Illinois, right?
Illinois State.
Okay. And then Lynn. Okay, so Lynn transferred to Cal from West...
University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana.
Right, okay. Lynn is the Washington bureau chief of the Chicago Sun-Times, and she also writes a column for the Hill newspaper. And she was like the walking authority on the Obamas during the Obama administration. And Lynn used to hitchhike to Berkeley from the Mission in San Francisco. And before she lived on campus or near campus, she just had one cardboard sign, and on one side it said Berkeley, and on the other side it said Mission. And so that's how she got back and forth to class.
My corner is right over there still. Yeah.
And then last but not least is the youngest of 9 siblings, Paul Kane, who is the Washington Post APK Capital column, Washington Post senior congressional correspondent, also a veteran of the Hill. And he's a Springsteen fan who hails from Philadelphia. So we got...
Can we talk about the Super Bowl now?
Yeah, we could. Yeah. Who won?
No idea.
Oh, okay.
We're putting that in the past.
Anyway, so I'm going to start with kind of a wonky question because of your institutional knowledge here. But when Donald Trump was elected, the idea was that Mitch McConnell was going to have him be the vehicle to get the conservative Supreme Court justice. And Paul Ryan wanted a tax cut. And then basically he was going to be their vehicle for that. But then basically they were going to kind of dictate what was going on. Well, last week the House shut down, the House Intelligence Committee shut down the probe on Russia. And Ryan had to have known that. We have in the new bill, the tax bill, where we now have massive debt. We're probably facing a trade war. So all these huge high principles of the GOP are suddenly eliminated or put into play or being neglected. So has the Republican Party capitulated to Donald Trump? You want to start, Carl?
Carl, you take that.
Thanks for having us here. I wanted to say before I started, and thanks to all the New York Times subscribers here. We really appreciate that. I can see you out there, and for those who aren't subscribing, I have to ask why. If you want to have a great panel, just have Maureen come in and talk someday about her own coverage. We had dinner last night in San Francisco. We're reliving some of these stories, and she is just a truly fantastic journalist, and we're honored to have her interview us on this thing. She's really the creme de la creme in this business. And also I want to thank Berkeley for having me, because as opposed to Lynn, trust me, they would have never let me on this campus.
This is the closest we'll get to Berkeley.
Berkeley wasn't happening for me. But anyway, to get to that first question, this is actually my entire column for tomorrow. I just wrote a piece about this, so I hope you will all read the On Washington column that will be online sometime tomorrow. And I mean, you make the great point. At the beginning, I remember Trump at first, he came in, and in those first couple of weeks, I ended up going in to interview Mitch McConnell. And Mitch, at that point, Trump was Trump at the beginning of his term, and things that were happening we just weren't used to in Washington. It was way out of control. And I went in to see Mitch McConnell. I said, Senator, are you going to save America? People think you need to save America. And he says, I don't think America needs saving. I like what I see so far. And this was the Republicans at that point saying, boy, Trump's actually going to be a conservative. We didn't think he was going to be a conservative. We didn't know what to expect. We thought he might become a Democrat even and get in and do all sorts of things. But so they sort of worked together. There was some sense that the Congress might actually reassert, as Maureen said, some of its powers that it's been giving over steadily to the executive branch for decades now, because members of Congress don't like to make tough decisions. They'd rather have the executive branch make those decisions for them. But now the tables are turned a little bit. In my column tomorrow, the lead is something to the effect, and it's off of the Pennsylvania election, is that the win or lose, the Republicans are now stuck with Trump, and Trump is stuck with them. And they have they have been taken over by Trump in his own ways. And the thing that in the election, Paul Ryan's response to the election was a press conference that Jake would normally be at, I think, on Tuesday, where the Republican leadership has their press conference. Paul Ryan was peppered with all these questions. He said, hey, look, Trump actually helped close this election and make this election closer than it was going to be.
Which, by the way, there's no evidence that that's true.
But he did say it. But so they're not looking at Trump going, oh my God, you're killing us. They're looking at Trump saying, you're actually more popular than we are in some respects with Republican voters. So we're in with you. And what you said was exactly right. They've cut off the House investigation, which could look bad in a few months, depending on what the special counsel comes up with. Guns, it looked like Trump was maybe going to do something, but they walked him back from that. They have said literally nothing about Stormy Daniels, have just sort of refused to address that. And, of course, the common comment you hear there is, well, how would they have been reacting if that was Barack Obama, right? The chaos in terms of the personnel turnover, that doesn't seem to be a concern to them. So I think there was some hope that the Republicans would assert themselves in a Trump administration, but I think that we're seeing that is not happening, and they just see their political fortunes tied to him now, and those political fortunes didn't look too good last night, to tell you the truth.
So let's hold on. Let's even take a step back from that, and I'll build off something Carl said. Barack Obama got flack for wearing a tan suit. And I don't mean that metaphorically. He did, members of Congress did question his, not fitness for office, but seriousness for wearing a tan suit. So
his fashion
it was
fitness.
A bad suit, but
it wasn't. I like a tan suit, so I don't know what to tell you. I think I'm in the midst of writing a book about Congress in the era of Trump, and I think Paul Ryan feels like he lost the argument in the campaign, and I'd be curious what all you guys think. But I think Paul Ryan, people don't remember this, and it's easy to forget. Paul Ryan didn't endorse the president, now the president, during his campaign.
It was a very famous
moment. It was a very famous moment with Jake Tapper on CNN where he said, I'm not ready to do that. I'm not ready. I'm not sure he's the guy. So he lost that argument. And this was reported at the time. He got on a conference call after the St. Louis debate, which was 28 days before the election, and basically said, you guys need to do what you need to do. If you don't want to defend him, you don't have to. It's a pretty stunning statement to make for the Speaker of the House 20-something days before the election. When Trump got elected, Ryan felt like, and you could have an opinion about what this means about Paul Ryan as much as you'd like, but Paul Ryan felt like, okay, well, this is the hand I've been dealt. And if you look at generally speaking, if you look at the policy that Paul Ryan has that Donald Trump has promoted. The tax bill is no different, and I'd be curious on what you guys think. The tax bill is no different than any tax bill Paul Ryan would have passed. So I think that, broadly speaking, President Trump is not different than what Paul Ryan would have done as a president or as a speaker. Policy-wise, I think obviously there's some definite difference in substance and tone, and Lynn and Paul could speak to some of that, but it's not a terribly different administration policy-wise than what a President Paul Ryan would have done.
Go ahead.
I think I'll be real brief. I think what Ryan and McConnell realized was that the conservative voters out there and the Republican Party and its base has changed, fundamentally changed in the last 10 to 15 years into something that is more Trump-like than it is Paul Ryan. And I think they've all of a sudden become, they've lived in fear, essentially, of their base for the last 6 years in a lot of ways. And when that happens, you really do, you're not able to, set the guardrails the way some thought was going to happen.
So, a few thoughts. First of all, thank you for having me. It is great to be back on campus. The model that a speaker has varies with each president. When I covered for many years House Speaker Denny Hastert, sad to say how he ended up in prison on these terrible sexual abuse-related charges. But back in the day, I always thought that he worked with the Republican president more as a compliant speaker who saw his role as carrying out orders from the boss. So now you have a chaos president who doesn't quite get yet that this is not a compliant in the bad board of directors, that they are all independently elected members whose own survival is always the first question asked and answered for each member. So that kind of exists in here. The reality of life on the Hill goes on almost as it was. Terrific access, you guys can run around, nothing has changed in terms of the physical ability to cover people. You have the big Russian investigations, but you know what, there is always something, and that's the craziness. But even just, was it today that the Senate voted to strip away Dodd-Frank, which is a big agenda item? Nothing has happened that a Republican can not defend back home, and I bet you that when it comes time, the primary season is just happening now. And members will soon know, most of them, if they have a challenge to the right. Paul Ryan will probably do what any speaker does, any leader does, because the leader knows the first job of the leader is to keep the majority. The first job of the leader is not to reelect the president. So once again, if need be, members will be told, do what you need to do. Now, if they get Trump's wrath, that might help them. I am sure we will all do stories on what districts Trump cannot go in. And maybe Pence can. We have a primary in Illinois. We're the next test tube case on Tuesday. You couldn't get Trump anywhere near the state for the governor, but maybe Pence could be. So in my kind of bottom line is that despite all these not normal times, the attacks on the press, the attacks on governing, the lack of concern that Trump seems to have with process of how legislation gets passed, he still seems to revel in trying to mix it up with the leaders and doesn't always seem so concerned with the outcome. My best example would be what he's done on guns just since the tragedy in Parkland. One day he's in and talks about age limits, and then when he meets again with the NRA, nothing happened. And nothing happened probably is the best position for the moment of the House Republican leadership.
Well, that reminds me of something you wrote, Carl, when you were talking, but you said here's how significant things don't get done in Washington, even in the moment of crisis and opportunity, referring to Parkland. And you said the president throws out a hodgepodge of ideas, thoroughly confusing both sides about what he really supports. So in other words, he goes out and he'll say something about guns or about immigration or something, and then all of a sudden it's like it's a new day and that hasn't happened, and they walk him back, and then we still have the paralysis. Is that a fair?
Yeah, I mean, and everybody had their own has an agenda there that's so different, and I think that the interesting thing about the gun meeting, one, was just sitting there, we all watched it, and when he said, take the guns first, due process later, I mean, there was literally a jolt that went through our bureau. It was like, wow, that's wild. But it also, we were all standing there also going, nothing's going to happen with this. This is all meaningless, and it's going to be totally overwritten, in the next 24 to 48 hours, which is exactly what happened. And it sort of raises, I think, the broader question there is, how do you govern in that situation? So the House today passed its gun bill, but it's really a gun, buck up schools bill, and
it passed with like 400 votes.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, doesn't even have the minor background check in it, and it's just become an impossible place to
What
govern.
it's become is a piece of direct mail for a campaign.
Well, I mean, and there'll be, this. I think that this issue will be in the general election, and the Democrats were starting to do this the last presidential election. Hillary Clinton was actually advocating gun control, and there was a push behind it with Gabby Giffords, and that was different because, and I wrote a story about this, because for previous years, from the 1990s in some ways, Democrats totally wouldn't talk about it at all. I mean, it was off the table. We're not going to talk about this because it's just going to hurt us. And now I think that on guns, you are seeing that they think this can be a wedge issue in certain places, though. But I mean, in a lot of other places, it's just not going to work.
One thing that's happened that's really changed over time is that the old model for passing critical legislation was you sort of made something bigger. You'd start with something on immigration or health care, and you only had about 48 votes in the Senate, but then if you added community health centers here, Bernie would come along and you'd start adding things up, and the coalition all of a sudden is over 60 in the Senate and 218 in the House. Nowadays, in this hyper-partisan era, the bigger things get, the more there is to say no. And, especially on immigration is that way. Like the bigger they try to make something on immigration, the more somebody says, well, no, I can't vote on that piece. That's amnesty, and things collapse the bigger they get. We've never really had just a simple vote on, do you support, legal status, path to citizenship for Dreamers? Because there's never been a bill that just did that, because it always ends up doing 52 other things.
Because of message votes, and everybody wants to make a point.
And also the president, his opinions are shifting, right? I mean, he doesn't support one thing as a discrete piece of legislation. I mean, he supports, like you said before, right? One day he supports gun control, the next day he doesn't. And you don't know, and you guys would know much better than me, but I think the worst thing in politics is when you're inside the Beltway constituents, and that's members of Congress and members and people in D.C., when they don't know where you are when they wake up in the morning. And that's what people said about Newt Gingrich, right? He would be one day in Congress, he would say one thing in the Capitol, and then the next day he'd say something completely different. The same goes for Trump. He supported a ban on assault weapons one day. By that evening, he did not support it.
Yeah, I mean, you don't know.
But that's crazy. That's a major policy. And I'm not saying anything about assault weapons ban. He supported a major shift in gun control and then didn't support
Let
it
alone
by the
seize-
next day.
Let alone seize the guns first.
He said, and he also said, right. He also said we should be clear about this, that they should take guns from people. Just take guns from people, and then he said,
I mean, this is
But then he
also,
said we should arm teachers too.
Which, by the way, he's still on this point. And for all of us, we concentrate on what can pass and what can't pass. Arming teachers cannot pass any version of this Congress.
No.
It is universally disdained. It's people who cover it like it's real are perpetuating a fan fiction of Washington.
But that's
And we should be really clear about that. Like the coverage of arming teachers is not real.
Hold on, I do want to take exception to that, though. Sometimes, in the long view, now I know, especially I'm betting with this crowd, it's a very unpopular proposition to arm teachers, but Congress sometimes takes years, even in the best of times, to kind of take an idea and maybe turn it into a piece of legislation. And I'm not predicting that it will be arming teachers, but I do think if we're pivoting into the big J of journalism and what we cover here as opposed to the public policy, which might be useful here, where I want to disagree, I think the idea is you could do both. It's not either or. We could say this doesn't have any chance of passing, but it is something that people now are talking about. And I think that means it's very much worthy of coverage as part of the search for solutions, because this is something that is coffee table talk. People have opinions. Everybody knows their teachers and think, oh, I would not want my third grade teacher near a
I went to Catholic schools with nuns. No way.
They would have shot you.
No way.
Right. So everyone.
You'd be dead by now.
But and then it would be concealed carry or what? But what this is, if we take away from the
And they could conceal.
yeah. But there's another frame of looking at it, which is why I'm kind of an advocate with journalism with the big J. I don't mind covering it. I always try to I only exist in the real world. I know I'm on an academic center.
Well, you're not like the president then.
No, I only exist in the real world. If you take away the idea that what seems to some people is absurd, you're really talking about how do we make schools more secure. That's the path that this conversation is on. And maybe arming teachers will work its way into something that maybe one day in the long arc of Congress, look at the years it took to get Medicare and Medicaid, to form all these big things. It does take time, so I'm not optimistic about anything having to do with guns. The last time I wrote after Columbine, surely now something will happen, and I learned my lesson in that one.
Well, that was why I wrote the story that you referred to, because to me in Washington there were too many stories saying, wow, it looks different. And I think this is actually a different moment because of the way these high school kids are functioning.
Very different.
This is a different moment.
Very
and
much.
I think it's very effective. And what happened today, this is effective things, and it does take a while. But what I wanted to say, I was reading too many stories saying, this is a different moment, maybe it's really going to happen. And I hate to, be the bad guy, but I just wanted people to know that, you know what, this isn't going to happen this time.
But also, it seems to me you've got a president now who really treats his office as a reality TV show.
Right, like they are not highly trained military grade teachers that are widespread throughout the country. There might be some in some locations, but the president didn't say he wanted to arm teachers and train them from the ground level. He said he intimated, he didn't say this, he said there are many
former Marines.
No, he said there are many teachers who have won sharpshooting contests. I'm not trying to make a joke.
No, he
did say this.
He makes it up.
And he said there are many teachers who have won sharpshooting contests that he wants to arm in the classroom. That is fiction. That's not something, but that's not something we should take seriously. That's not something we should say, this could happen. That cannot happen.
Okay.
Based on the votes in this Congress.
All right,
that cannot happen.
Okay.
I mean, that's not something that could happen.
We heard you.
Okay.
I'm just trying to make the point, PK.
I'm talking about the reality show, about waking up every morning and starting all these tweets that there's a big question here. Should everybody cover every single tweet, no matter how wacky it is? Some people say yes, some people say no.
I would love to jump in on this one.
Well, go ahead then.
Here's what's wonderful about the president's tweets. It has democratized the journalism of knowing what's on the president's mind, for better or worse.
Good thing.
So you could sit in your pajamas in Berkeley or El Cerrito or Marin. I could be in my PJs at home in Washington. And yeah, I look and see what's on his mind. As we just know, yesterday he announced the firing of Rex Tillerson. So the plus is that, yes, if you're responsible for covering the White House, you cover it. If we cover press releases and Instagram posts and video press releases and calls from press people, what is really unusual, of course, is that this is released from the president himself. But by the end of the, early on in the Obama administration, they realized that they had all these forms of communication, which I don't begrudge. You're the office holder, do what you do. But they never sent anything out in one central place. So you had to think, well, are they announcing this today on Instagram? Did Mrs. Obama announce this on Glamour magazine website? Was this on some new form of social media I never heard of? And you didn't even know what to follow.
So he's making your job easier for you.
Well, I think what I appreciate.
Not especially.
Nothing is ever easy because there's always, if it saves a little time there, it only adds more, someplace else, because you have an avalanche of potential stories, at 6 o'clock. But I do appreciate that you're hearing it from the horse. It's not a spokesman said, it's not leaks to the New York Times and the Post, that will Tillerson be fired? The Post has a source that says whatever. So you kind of get it, and on that point, news is news.
We went through this debate in the Washington Post. We we had it out, and there was this sort of, during the campaign, and then especially in the transition, of just like, how do you treat these statements? They are statements. And we pretty much came down on the side of, if the president tweets something at 5 o'clock on a Sunday night saying that there are 3 million or 4 million people who voted illegally, and that is provably false, our decision was, we're not just going to ignore that. We have to write. Absolutely. We don't have to write every single tweet. But we don't have to write news off of every single tweet. But we have to, when he's talking about things, controversial things, we have to consider it as his views. We now have we've created a new position where it's part of the White House team, and it rotates each week. It's called the hot seat. The person is, there used to be just something called the duty reporter who has to go to every press briefing and then travel with the president. This is in addition to that. This is the hot seat. You are up at 6 a.m., and maybe you're not at your desk, but you are looking at the phone.
The phone and Fox and Friends.
Refreshing. And all of a sudden, he starts going after Joe and Mika. Your job is to get up and just start typing away. The President of the United States today attacked, 2 morning show hosts.
Is it also your job if, for example, last week where you've got all these disasters, he's got Stormy Daniels, he's got more Russia stuff, and so then he decides to say, well, he's negotiating with North Korea and he's going to start a trade war. And then this week, as soon as we see that Connor Lamb might be winning on Monday, all of a sudden Rex Tillerson's fired. So I'm just wondering, to me it's like this big reality show, and I'm just wondering, to what extent do you also how much do you have to put it in context, or am I just being cynical?
It all has to be in context, but anything the president says or does is news. And if you don't like it, I mean, Carl, don't you think so? I mean,
Yeah, no, I totally. There's a guy on Twitter. I'm Hill Hulse on Twitter, by the way. I can always.
and I'm
use,
at Jake
I
Sherman,
can-
and Luke Russert still has more followers than all
Yeah,
of us.
yeah,
so-
yeah. I know. Kind of. But there's a guy on Twitter who takes those tweets, and I don't know who it is, and he puts them on official White House stationery and tweets that out and says an official statement from the president with the tweet on it.
And he's right.
And he's right. It is an official statement from the president. Yeah, of course, we have to do this. And this is part of how Trump has paralyzed Washington, though, because so he says all sorts of changing things. The Republicans don't want to get out in front of him because they live in fear of getting tweeted at. Right? That Trump acts at them, because that can really finish them off. And I thought one of the interesting things in the Tillerson story and the sort of TikTok of how it went down was that Kelly said, "You may get a tweet."
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is how the chief
kiss
of
of
staff
death.
is now telling the Secretary of State that he might be on thin ice.
Formerly a
You may
three-
get a tweet.
Formerly a 3-star Marine general
Yeah.
and the head of ExxonMobil.
Now, there is a new...
You may get a tweet.
This is a new debate that's sprung up, and I'm kind of along these similar lines, because people honestly don't like to read the news sometimes. I mean, it's been good business for us, obviously, but some people want to turn it off. And after his rally Saturday in Pennsylvania, there was discussion among people, and it was mainly from the left, that TV shouldn't show all those in full, in their entirety, that you shouldn't devote that to it. It's Saturday night, it's the president. I mean, Donald Trump says things that affect our relationships around the world in a really serious way.
I never heard once during the Obama administration, and they say different things, clearly, but there was never an argument that the Obama rally...
Yeah, no, it was just an interesting new one that popped up.
Yeah.
Well, I have another question, though. If the press is, we have all this new vocabulary, which is fake news, false narrative, deep state, all these different things, which are direct frontal attacks on the establishment press. You have Fox, which has now become his own particular private voice. And so how do you get, how does the press maintain its credibility when you actually have part of the Republican platform now practically to completely attack the press? And the major base, the 35% base that has elected Trump, invested in not believing us as factual press people. How does that work?
I mean, I'll just
now?
give you a couple examples. I mean, the first thing I would say, and everybody else would agree, I think we just have to do our job the best we can and be accurate and bulletproof and be really careful. And, we really try to do that. I mean, we're doing the best we can at that. But this is one example I use. Eric Lipton, who is an investigative reporter for us, really two-time Pulitzer winner, one of the best in the business. I always say the worst phone call you can get in Washington is Eric Lipton's on the phone for you. But he posts all of his documentation for his stories now in the cloud. You can go read, and he'll help you through it. You can read his material, and he puts it up there. We need to be super transparent on how we do a lot of this work.
I'm not going to be there for it, but we're doing a seminar to start doing the same thing at the Post tomorrow afternoon. They're going to try and teach people to do what Eric does.
So
Yeah.
everything is going to be
The Post
notated?
is
there
following
notes
us.
in the back
I
of
would
the
say.
chapter?
Yeah, it's the idea, especially on a really big investigative piece that Eric does. The idea is, you can put a whole lot more into the web, and you can show people.
Link, link, link.
Yeah.
And Eric is even happy to get on there and help, walk people through it. I really think that is one of the best tools we have.
Can I make one point on this? I think one thing that doesn't get across is that, and all of us have covered the Hill in various shapes and forms. The fake news, you guys are liars moniker, and it doesn't extend to Capitol Hill, where we all.
True.
And I know because I work alongside these people every day. It doesn't exist on the Hill. I've never I cover Republicans. That's what I've covered Republicans for 10 years. Republicans on the Hill don't do fake news. They don't say, we're not going to talk to you because you wrote a bad story about us. Part of politics is there are stories that people don't like and stories that people do like. And all of us have written stories critical of both parties, but Donald Trump is, I think, the first politician that I've encountered that says, who says he won't talk to us because he considers us fake news. And I think all of you guys would agree, right? I mean, people get upset about stories.
I wouldn't.
But I have some other points when you're done.
I'm done.
Okay. The idea I think we've conveyed hopefully so far is that the Capitol, what goes on under the dome, is kind of a little island for the moment of normalcy in a sea of uncharted, chaotic, unprecedented, Trump-captained waters. However, I think the danger of the demagoguery involved in this fake news is one of the most serious impacts of the Trump administration. You see, whether or not you're a Republican or a Democrat, progressive or Tea Party, there's things to like or not like. If you're a conservative, you might not like Trump, but you love Justice Gorsuch. You're going to love all the judges that are coming in, and some of that is just the lumps of who won and who didn't. I do think the fake news is having an impact, maybe not with elected officials we deal with, who, it's very human, by the way. People I've known forever, they've known forever, so they're not going to, someone who you've covered for a decade is not going to say, Paul, you're fake news. He might say, Paul, your story's a hunk of shit, but, right? And then you could deal, but that you could deal with. Or if somebody says, I can't believe you wrote that, Lynn.
Recently had an exchange with a lawmaker that was a lot worse than a hunk of
Right, but they don't go to the essence.
But that was the general gist.
Right, but the idea that, you made it up or fabricated isn't there, but I do think that news outlets, I hope, from local to national, are just on guard to whatever you do it more heavily, safeguard. The things that these guys do are really capable mostly by organizations that also do the big investigations. I think part of the issue of fake news in the Trump world, again, if we're getting back to the journalism with a J, it's stories that there aren't a lot of documents about. Chaos in the White House. 5 sources said Kelly did or did not know about Rob Porter before or after whatever happened. Those are harder stories to document because they are built on anonymous sources by very credible reporters. So I do think as we ponder what to do with fake news, number one is first we do our jobs, keep our heads down, and then hopefully not get involved in a first, in the first wave of saying that my mission is anything different than it's ever been just to get the story right. What I've tried to do in this era is a little more explaining. A lot of my stories now, I just use subheads. I don't have the space that these guys have. The story for me would be 800 words. That might be half of what these guys get. I do use more subheads. Sometimes I put the background first. Very untraditional, usually, in how you do a newspaper story. But I want to build in more ways to let people know I'm going to be telling you about something that really happened, and here are the people who are going to tell you about it. Now I'm going to tell you what the news is today, just in case people, I want to make it harder for someone just to say, oh, that's a fake story. No, the story's real. You might not like it, which, okay, that's there. So that's just kind of a way of thinking about how to proceed as we are in, I think, a very dangerous time when it comes to how powerful and fast Trump was able to make part of our civic conversation, even the notion that what most reporters do is fake news.
I agree with that. I agree with what you're saying there. I do think that it has a very corrosive effect, and a lot of our institutions are under attack. And, there's a lot of people here, and Lynn and I and yourself, we were around in the 60s and 70s, and, we go through cycles of, real civic dispute, and we're going to have to kind of fight this out. I think there is some...
So here's one of the things I say when somebody says, oh, you reporters, all you do is fake news. And then I'd say, and you could fill in your team. I'd say, well, did you see the the Cubs played last night. Oh, I said, do you know what the score is? Oh, yeah, the Cubs beat the Dodgers 5-4. I said, well, how do you know? How do you know? Well, I read it in the paper. Okay, or you saw the game, or you didn't see the game, so you trusted somebody reported. Well, I saw it on the website. Well, how do you know the website wasn't phony? Okay? And then it does stop. If you're ever trying to get people to think a minute, how do you know who really won that Olympic medal?
So just one last thing on that, though.
Yeah.
But I work at the New York Times. I've been there since '86. We're always under attack. We've always been under attack, and people are always criticizing us for all sorts of things, and I'm sure some of you do and will later tonight in questions and answers. But this is the first time in my experience where people come up and thank me and say, you know, we really appreciate it. Can we make you some cookies? Honestly, I get that. Can we send you a pizza? You know,
Carl says yes to all of
thanks
those.
for doing that. But I mean, so to me, the attacks, though social media allows them to be spread so widely and fastly, you know, we've always gotten that. But there's a whole other side of this that actually is working.
I think we digested this, but Chuck Todd gave this interview shortly before the president called him a son of a bitch last Saturday. And
Sleepy son of a bitch.
Sleepy son of a bitch.
I am a sleepy son of a bitch.
But these attacks, these name-calling attacks that specifically call out people are really unprecedented. I mean, you can say you don't like somebody's story, or you can call them up and complain privately, but to have your name being tweeted all over the world like that as a son of a bitch.
It's dangerous.
Yeah, but anyway, but what Chuck said, he said that this is an Iraq moment for the media. The press has to get it right. We can't afford to get a big story wrong. He said the margin of error is so much smaller, and we know we don't own our credibility. We don't own our own our own credibility. We're collectively in this. And I mean, do you agree it's that strong?
The way to fight back. There's a gentleman here with the "Enemy of the People" T-shirt out there, and a lot of journalists have responded by saying, like, "We're at war, we're at war."
Yeah.
And my executive editor at the Washington Post, Marty Barron, one of the great newsmen of his era. Marty was the editor. He was the editor of the Boston Globe when they uncovered the
former New York
Boston
Times
arch and Marty's response to all of this is always, you know, don't engage in the fight and the sleep eyes. Just keep kicking ass and doing your job. He has this saying. He says, "We're not at war, we're at work."
Excellent.
That's good. That's good.
It just has to be like women have always had to be. Twice as good as a man to get we're here among many San Francisco Democrats. And I think we need to talk a little bit about the Democrats. Because there's one school of thought, of course, the Democrats should be going to take the House again, right? I mean, what is it, 23 seats or 25?
23
seats
as
as
last
of today, yeah.
If it's confirmed.
I think it's been
Has it since?
pretty much.
Okay, so
The Times has
whole
called it,
idea
which-
is for the Democrats to take the House. But then there's this contrarian point of view which says, wait a minute, if the Democrats can retake the House, that's just going to postpone a very needed exercise, which is to question the leadership that's been there for 15 years at least, that is not challenging, it doesn't come from the part of the party that has the most energy now, which is the more left part of the party. And to what you tweeted the other day, just before the Lamb election last night, was it over 60% of the people in that district in Pennsylvania had no idea what the Democrats stood for, except for being against Donald Trump. Yeah. So how do we deal with this?
I just want to say I want to make a few points here, and I'll say what Luke Russert, your son, said when he was covering Capitol Hill for NBC, and he got a lot of flack for it at the time. A lot of people, a lot of Democrats that we all hear from say, we don't think that 370 So Nancy Pelosi, 77, Steny Hoyer, the number 2 House Democrat, is 77, and Jim Clyburn, the number 3 House Democrat, 78. Luke asked Nancy Pelosi 3 or 4 years ago, what do you say to your 6 years ago? What do you say to your colleagues who say you are too old to be the top of your party? A real complaint that a lot of Democrats, we're not saying that we're saying it, but a lot of Democrats do say that. And she said, why don't you ask Harry Reid and Mitch McConnell. Well, their colleagues weren't saying that at the time, but that is a more valid, not a more valid, but a more pronounced question than ever. A lot of people that we all talk to question the age situation in the Democratic Party.
I would like to weigh in when you even use kind of language like the age situation. I'm just being a little provocative. Okay.
I'm just saying.
I'm looking around at who's in this audience.
They're not the House Minority Leader.
No, these we're talking about real life and real politics. The reason that somebody hangs on to a position is that they have the power. It's not whether, we could dissect and think and contemplate, how does Pelosi hang on, how does Hoyer get there? Okay, but they got there. You can't beat someone with no one. And you tell me who is going to challenge Nancy Pelosi come January of 2019, and then we could talk about if she's too young, too old, or whatever. See, I think it's the question is, there are other people that want to be speaker or leader for a variety of reasons, even if she was half that age. Boehner wasn't chased out because of age, it's because he thought he couldn't function. There were people that rose up against him and chased him out.
Boehner was a decade younger than him, a decade younger than Pelosi.
Right. So I'm looking at it the other way. Every leader could be chased out. Show me the members that are actively feel they have the chutzpah to go chase her out. So I just want to reframe this from the idea that they're all old. Isn't that maybe I'm a little touchy here, okay? But the point is, it's the other point. She has held on to power. No one else for the moment has figured out how to do it better than her.
Sure.
So it's, since I don't deal in the abstract, like, it probably would be better to have a Democratic Paul Ryan. Look how nice he looks, right? He's in shape, he exercises, he looks great. Okay.
So now you're going into appearances.
No, exactly. But actually, that's an important point.
But that's my point here. Show me the votes.
So 30% of the party voted against her.
She would be.
But it's also important for us as reporters to reflect that there is a sentiment in the party that
I'm not against that.
Democrats feel, not overwhelmingly, but dozens and dozens and dozens say on the record that we don't want to be represented by a 77-year-old, and we feel like the party could benefit from being represented by somebody younger.
But that's just, so the next thing is, that's nice, we do the stories, but I'm just saying now, if we're pivoting from the journalism, big J, that it's our responsibility to report this, then I'm just saying, as an aside, as long as I'm here, show me the votes, and if somebody comes up and challenges
But my question was a little bit different.
Yeah.
It wasn't really about that personality so much. It was the idea that people don't really know what the Democrats stand for. And that's the question about, how is that going to work? And what's most, how are they going to deal with that? And also, the Republicans love seeming to have Nancy Pelosi because they slotted her right in after Hillary Clinton, and now she's
so that would be the reason
before and after.
She's the pinata now, and she is the thing that they go after in absence, I guess, of what else are we supposed to believe that the Democrats stand for. So that's my question.
Let me
to help out my mom there, the question would be that if you take her out of the equation, is that not a lot easier for the Democrats to take back the House?
Not necessarily. There's two schools of thought. There are some schools of thought that Democrats can win back the majority just on anti-Trump energy alone. Conor Lamb did not have a really detailed agenda that he was running on. There's another school that is just feels that both they can politically do better if they have some sort of agenda, and there is just a responsibility to have an agenda as a political party. But the last few cycles, they pretty much had a vague effort to raise the minimum wage, more college affordability that didn't really explain how you were going to get there, and better health care, but not really. It was such a vague agenda that's where you get people, Democrats themselves, saying, oh, I don't know exactly what they're going to do. And if there's a criticism of the Senate and House Democratic leadership of the last 4 years, it's probably that they really have not put forth a whole, a couple of big ideas that people can latch onto.
Yeah, I think that's true. First, I want to say Nancy Pelosi has had one of the most phenomenal political careers of a woman in history.
Not only a woman, a man too.
And just like an incredible politician. When I did a podcast with her last year around Christmas, I guess, I asked her during the podcast if she needed to win back the House to gain redemption. Well, that was not a good question. Redemption? Well, I don't need redemption, and but she, kind of more to Lynn's point in some ways about show me the person who can raise as much money as Nancy Pelosi. Nancy Pelosi is a fundraiser, but I do think that the Democrats have to figure out some sort of transition of power at some point. But on the messaging side, I mean, this is 100% true. The problem with the Democrats, and the Democrats know it right now. So whether they can rise to the occasion, part of them wants to just campaign as a check. We're the check on Trump. We're the check on Trump. And that kind of works. But you have to have an economic message. Trump hijacked their economic message the last election. That's what Democrats have been running on forever. So how do you, I'm going to help the little guy.
Not only
people are forgotten.
Make it in America was the Democrat slogan.
So they need to figure out something. They haven't yet. And I've talked to Democrats who admit they're really struggling on this tax cut message because they don't think the tax cut's going to have that great a bounce for the Republicans. And we're seeing some evidence of that. But it's hard to be against a tax cut. It's just hard to explain in certain places. And Democrats are saying, our big problem right now is to figure out how to talk about that tax cut in a way that works. It's easy to say, crumbs or whatever, but they've got to figure out a message. And I don't think they can get where they need to be without a better message.
This is my last question before we turn it over to the audience. But just personally for all of you, things have accelerated to such an extent now. And we have this 24/7 news cycle. How do you guys just personally cope with the
Jake
speed?
should answer because he really has the 24-hour news
I know.
cycle.
You guys don't even take a day off. Playbook is 7 days a week. Everything is so 24/7. And everything's going to just keep accelerating. So how can human beings just actually physically keep it up?
I mean, I'll start. I think that after the election, when that happened, and we could do a whole separate panel on election night and everybody's reaction. But I said, boy, this is going to take some people out of the business because it's exhausting. And but speaking of age, I'm not that young myself. There's some days like, man, I may actually be too old for this. We work all the time. The phone is the bane of our existence, right? This thing never goes away. Paul and I were flying out on United. And at DCA, they announced that the wireless wasn't going to work on the plane. And Paul was a couple aisles behind me, and other people were kind of moaned. And I go, my God, it's a blessing.
Tell them what we missed.
Oh, and so,
Tell them what we missed.
But you know, as soon as we're coming in, I'm like, when I got the phone on, I'm like, when am I going to get a signal? You know, we've been in the air for 6 hours. What's happened? And you know, Tillerson been fired. and so we get on the ground, and I go to Paul. I go, do you see what's happened already? He goes, no. He goes, my email doesn't work.
I thought you were talking about something about tonight. And my email wasn't working. My phone wasn't working. I was like, what? Oh, Tillerson.
So, I mean, it is actually really exhausting. I've been a reporter since 1977. And, you know, I work way harder these days, you know, than I did before. And it can be grueling because it's a more confrontational time. But Jake is just constantly working, right?
I think we all are constantly working. I think every single one of us is always trying to keep up with what's going on. I write a morning newsletter called Playbook. Subscribe, politico.com/playbook, which comes out by about 6:15 East Coast time.
What time do you get up?
I get up around. You're not asking me.
No, but but what time?
I don't know.
I get up between 3:30 and 4.
And he has, how old's your baby?
I have a 5.5-month-old at home, and he sleeps longer than I do. Playbook was started by. I've been at Politico for 9 years, and Playbook was started by Mike Allen, who preceded me at Politico and was one of our founders. And we just try to be the morning newsletter for DC and to kind of explain what's going on in DC and in the morning before everyone gets up and what people wake up to. But yeah, it's exhausting because you can get up. So we try to put Playbook out by 6 or 6:20, and sometimes we have it wrapped up. And as you guys said before, the president tweets at 6:10, and it's not like, hey, you know, I'm wearing green socks today. It's like, hey, you know, I have a brand new massive trade policy that will impact. And I'm not. He didn't announce that on Twitter. I'm just giving an example. Like, he does announce big decisions on Twitter, which, by the way, is not. It's not a criticism. I mean, we break news. All of us break news on Twitter all the time. It's just that's just a additive stress, I guess, is the best way to say it, right? Don't you guys think so?
Yeah.
I have a little different model than these guys. They work for very big organizations. I've mainly, for most of my career, have been a solo operator. I mean, the Sun-Times, I'm the only one for the Sun-Times in Washington. I have always been working in an extremely competitive environment from my first days as a suburban reporter outside of Chicago until now. So when people say, oh, are things more busy? I'd say things are, there's all, you know, if I die tonight, what you should put on my gravestone.
Don't do that, though.
God forbid.
No. Yeah.
Okay, is just say always something. Okay? Because, you know, this something's a little different. I get it. And obviously this Trump thing is a whole new universe of just serial lying, you know, fabrication, all that. I get it. But if you're just asking me as a human being, I've always been, especially once somebody invented the web and a blog, which I had early on. I started what was then a true blog where I just could, you know, the paper didn't even know what it was, but if I wanted to do it, it was okay back in the days. Now, really, blogs per se don't exist. It's just another way to get your words out there. So I have always had stuff I've been worried about. And it might not have been the White House. It could be, I always look for that intersection because I do work for Chicago paper for something that would intersect with us. And obviously I had a big ride with Obama. But I've never had peace. I've never been able to say I'm done.
I think she makes it something.
That's actually good. That's actually a good phrase. I've never had peace.
I want to give a slightly contradictory but more explanatory view. The first year or two of any administration is, and there's a couple of veterans of the most past one out in the audience, can tell you, like, the Obama 09-10 drive to pass the first stimulus act that ended at 10 o'clock on a Friday night, and Sherrod Brown had to fly from his mother's funeral in to cast the 60th vote on that bill. Healthcare. These were just some grinding.
Wasn't there a New Year's Eve? I remember
Christmas
New Year's.
No,
Christmas
Eve was healthcare.
No, there was a New Year's Eve.
No, New Year's Eve was 2010.
Fiscal cliff was the New Year's.
Taxes.
Okay.
Christmas Eve.
I was up in the Senate.
We're not in the weeds here. We're not in the weeds.
We're mixing up our
2009. Christmas Eve
ACA
2009 was healthcare. December 31st, 2012 was the tax deal.
Okay.
Right. Yeah, you're right.
So these are crazy times. Lots of hours worked. I don't think that I'm working any longer hours than I would have if President Clinton were in her 14 months. But the craziness inside each hour worked.
That's probably right. Yeah.
There was a day where Trump was coming up to the Senate luncheon to try to push on the tax plan. It was late October, and Bob Corker, who's retiring, had been in somewhat of a public feud with Trump, had gone quiet. Well, that morning they put him on 2 morning shows, maybe even 3, and he just lit up Trump again and again, said he was completely incompetent, not good for the job. Well, all of a sudden, our person in the hot seat just starts pounding away, writing this story. Then CNN realizes they didn't get any of that video, so they tell Manu, CNN's congressional correspondent, you got to go get Corker. He gets Corker going into the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and Corker goes even further and further and says, oh, so would you support him for president again? Oh, no, never. So then MSNBC is watching Manu and CNN getting all this, and they say, Casey Hunt, get over to the Foreign Relations Committee so you can get Corker when he's coming out. And
that's all in an hour?
This is all by 11 a.m. Trump comes to the Capitol by 12:30, and it actually was a peaceful lunch. And at 2:30, I'm thinking, all right, we can settle down. This day is settling in. Look at my phone, Arizona Republic. Senator Jeff Flake is announcing that he's retiring, and he is going to do so in a lengthy Senate floor speech.
There's the day.
Boom. The craziest thing that had not even happened by 11.
So sitting here, I do have an answer for a question I think you asked.
Good. Okay. Then
but I'll do it quickly.
Yeah. We have to.
And what is different? One of the things I do less reporting on are serious policy proposals out of the White House. Because there aren't any. I mean,
aren't as many, probably.
Aren't as many, and they're not. There were. I've covered. I came here at the end of the first year, Bill Clinton, Bush, and Obama, and every so often there's just this enormous piece of complex legislation. It could maybe pass or elements, so I have to learn it and understand it. And it's like having your It's having your final and you never took the course kind of thing. And, you cram it, you learn it. Oh, my God, explain to me how the tax thing will work in this bill dealing with this. So in that way, there is less to do. So I have something that's a little less.
Okay, on that lesser note, we will open the, and we have a microphone going around, right? Okay. Go ahead.
I'd like to introduce a new word. It's called fraud news. If I buy a $10 fake diamond and I pay $10,000 because I was told it was real, that's fraud. Can I see a show of hands? How many know what Annie Oakley did to the press in 1910?
Shoot at it.
She sued them 55 times for fraud news. She won 54 times. I wonder why the media didn't tell you this. How many have heard of George Lakoff's film HotCoffeeTheMovie.com? Okay, so you know that we've been brainwashed not to sue. So I can Google the word fake news and get 10 million, 50 million, 100 million hits. I Googled the word fraud news.
What is your question?
The question is, if every court case where Fox News damaged constituents by having them vote against their interest, and that damage was taken out of Fox News's hide, how long? I think Fox News would be toast in about 1 year. What's your estimate?
I think
They'd have never made it to causing the Iraq War.
I think what is, I'm not a lawyer. I've stumbled out of possibly being a lawyer in college and took an intro to law class, and thank God I hated it. But what is interesting about the media that is happening, some of it happens with the NRA, sometimes there's a boycott of Fox, but the corporate world and their reaction to Parkland, I think you can see, Sean Hannity's had companies pull their advertising from his show. That done in a certain way will be more quickly effective than ever trying to go through court. And if you can get corporations to pull their advertising, that is a big fight.
Washington Post hides it from us.
Okay, next question. Oh, there's hands all over the place. Well, you're there now. That man's close to you. So.
I have a very nitty-gritty question. I'm fascinated by these stories where it says, 13 anonymous sources in the White House said that President Trump is planning a new staff shakeup and so-and-so is going to be fired, so-and-so is going to be hired. In what form do those sources talk to people like yourselves? Is it text messages? Is it messages in invisible ink left in dead drops? Is it whispers in the hallway? I'm just curious about that.
It actually is more and more. I'll just speak broadly about DC now. I think, I know I speak more on encrypted, secret messaging apps than ever before.
I don't do that, but I was told by somebody that I'm insane that I don't have those apps on my phone.
Confide, which is one
Signal.
app. Signal, WhatsApp is encrypted end to end. And this is not, it's not for any other reason, but people in many offices have said they're afraid that their bosses will look in their phone or they're monitoring their phone, and so that is a legitimate concern of many. And the West Wing, they have announced, because of security concerns, what they say is security concerns is that you can't bring in your personal cell phone, which is unlike anything before. But listen, on Capitol Hill, as we could all attest to, it's much different than the White House, because on Capitol Hill we pretty much have
see people.
Right, we have unfettered access to. Actually, there are many spaces in Capitol Hill where you see signs that says members of Congress and the press, and no aides. So on Capitol Hill, you are very able to meet members of Congress without anybody around them. So it's a different dynamic totally than in the White House, right?
Yeah, and I think to your other point, the 13 or 26, the number, I mean, that's there to counter the fake news claim, right? It's to show, hey, we talked to a lot of people about this. And
a lot of people in your White House
but
you don't think are talking
This
are
is the
talking.
great irony of the White House, right? These guys talk like never before.
Never true.
They are the most undisciplined White House I have ever even
And
come
Lynn can
close
talk
to.
about this more than anybody because she covered the Obama White House so closely. A lot of times they were very closely guarded in many aspects because they were so enamored with the president and wanted to guard his, right?
There was a sense of mission in the Obama
Right.
White House,
That's a better
and
way to put
everybody
it.
was rowing together. So it was a rare story. Also, he just had a stable staff, the no drama Obama thing. The big transitions.
And they'd been with him for a
orderly.
while, right?
Yeah.
A lot of them.
So the drama chaos stories out of the White House. And the other thing is that Trump has such a small inner circle. He doesn't have people who came up with him.
Right.
And that matters a lot in communication. Now, one of the other things when you talk about number of sources, and people do cite, as Carl said, just to try and show people it's not just one disgruntled person, don't discard just the serendipity factor too, that people stumble into things and figure things out and are getting things from sources who may not realize exactly what they're giving up in a conversation. You know, they know they're not being quoted, but you know, sometimes it takes a lot of crumbs and then all of a sudden there's a loaf. One of the things I do with sources, if it's something very critical, I know I'm right because you really know what's going on. You know that Joe Blow is going to be fired. But I will then call a dozen other people who work right around you and ask the same question. It's not like I don't believe you, but I do it as a way that everybody could say, so in case you slipped and said, oh, did Lynn call you? And I don't want you to slip and say yes, and then I want you to look around and say, did she call anyone else? And a dozen people say, yeah, that son of a bitch, okay? That's one of the techniques I use, is just to keep calling people just so that you may not even know you were the confirming source, which I think is kind of good.
Yeah.
And I use that as a technique all the time. And as a nice byproduct, I might find out other things along the way.
Sorry.
My question is, how do you select the stories you cover? And I was a little dismayed that the idea...
I think they select me.
The idea that the president, anything the president says is news, I wonder if that doesn't give away your function. And I see night after night the same stories over and over and over. They're covered 50 times. And whether you're attacking them or praising them or saying how ridiculous he is, the rest of the government seems to go on functioning. Those of us who worked on the Hill know there's lots of stuff going on affecting billions of dollars and millions of people, and it's not covered. And it seems to me we're giving up that role of selecting what the news is to this demagogue in the White House.
Well, I just want to say this briefly, that the top line of the national news, or the top story in Congress, yes, multiple people covered from other ways. There are just so many outlets, there are so many places making news, there are so many specialty publications. Because I'm just little old me here, no one expects me every night to have the big story of the day. I kind of very often just follow my own path. And because we have a primary in Illinois Tuesday, I've been focusing on that, which I also think it's a little test tube. You know, so I found something I wanted to investigate on money and politics. So I just did it, the rest of the world be damned, because it was original. And it was something no one else was doing. So I would say look below the surface. Yes, the big story of the day, these are big national outlets, they're going to have it, but they do offer so much more. Yeah, so don't be.
But I would also say you're also looking at 3 and 4 people that have devoted their career to covering Capitol Hill.
Yeah,
and
so
you too, Lynn, you're selling yourself short in the sense that you only cover these I mean, you've covered the Hill for a long time. All 3 of us are on Capitol Hill every single day covering those stories that you say, that you say are not getting covered. I mean, we were just speaking generally that when the president says something, it is generally news. He's the president of the United States, whether you like him or not, but we all do cover the Hill.
I think in terms of the amount of coverage that actual policy ideas are given is, and I know you're going to say he's insane. It's probably more today than it has ever been before, but it's a smaller piece of the pie. 20, 25 years ago, when the O.J. Nicole murder happened, there was only one cable channel, and what that did is it created this incredible interest in really crime. And you had Fox and MSNBC that came along, and they really focused on crime.
John Bonet,
Lacey
Peterson,
and that stuff. And in the last 5 years especially, and in the last year, it's been all politics, wall to wall. It is, the only thing that breaks through is like a hurricane. And so there is more, and actually then the hurricane coverage turns into political coverage. How did he do? Where was FEMA? Is there any power in Puerto Rico? So you're now, so in that 1 hour you watch a CNN from 4 to 5 in the afternoon, you're probably actually going to get more coverage about like tax policy than you ever would have gotten 10 years ago. But it's 3 minutes, and the other 57 minutes is the...
I'm just glad to hear that somebody wants more appropriations bill stories, because I've been arguing that at the New York Times for years. And I mean, I honestly agree with you in some sense, because, you know, and especially with metrics now where you can measure story readership, you know, the papers gravitate towards the bigger stories. I do think there can always be more and better coverage. Honestly, I don't worry about Washington. What I worry about is state capitals, honestly. This is what's going on in Sacramento and Springfield and Tallahassee, and I really think that that's where the news business is really struggling. There's not the resources there anymore, but I am definitely quoting you to people at the Bureau. I was like, see? Because metrics, it's
you
a
have
funny,
at least one.
It's a funny thing with these metrics because, you know, everybody goes, here's the big story, you know, we can tell that 2 million people read that story. Well, we still need to do the story that the 40,000 people or 50,000 people are going to read because it's important. So I kind of take your remark to heart.
This is a bit of a follow-up, I think, to what you've been just talking about. But the New York Times and the Washington Post and other big papers are criticized a lot for not having seen the Trump phenomenon coming and for not having predicted that he even had a chance of becoming...
Needle, you mean that thing?
Yeah, that thing, right. The percentages and the polling. And at the same time, the number of newspaper reporters nationally is down by about 50% over the last 15 years. So how have you been affected? How do you connect those two phenomenon? And do you think that there's a relationship between the decline in medium-sized newspapers nationally and other reporters doing their jobs and the ability of the, I can't say East Coast press because you're from Chicago, but East Coast press, you know, large mainstream press, from being able to really understand what's going on in the country at the ground level?
You put so many questions in this. The struggle of newspapers outside of the big, you know, you're looking at 3 of the best outlets, stable outlets. They have the funding. They're not going anywhere. Most outlets, mine, we just got sold again. It is a struggle, and so I think that's independent. That's the struggle of newspapers to survive is different than your question of whether or not we have ignored a story, done it well, and the whole story of why and how Trump was covered, which could give us another hour here. And I'm happy to stay, but I just beg you to separate it because the local papers, the Sun-Times of the world, the Indianapolis paper, they don't exist to outside of when the primary comes to their town to do it. They should be covering the state capitol, the city council, the mayor's race, which for my paper, and I know there's a guy there that knows very well, if you say, Lynn, you know, if somebody said, Lynn, we have a good story with Rahm or Trump, you know, I'd say, what should I spend my time on today? Well, of course Rahm would go first, okay? The mayor.
He'll be happy to hear.
Yeah, but so I'm saying that it is such a struggle in this very tough news environment to keep a newspaper alive. I think that's just so independent and very worthy of a conversation. And we know what my paper is trying to do is we are hoping to find models to keep us there. So it's kind of a non-answer as to what happened in the Trump cover-up, which these 3 guys, we kind of had they maybe could synthesize what we all talked about at breakfast today to give you your answer on that. But I would just beg you, separate out the struggle of papers that don't have all the wherewithal that these guys have just to survive.
Okay, we only have time for a couple more questions. Okay, excuse me. Did you want to say something?
No.
Okay.
Questions?
Okay.
Go in the back.
All right. Yeah. Go ahead. You first, and then you. Okay.
I can yell.
Yeah, just yell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. This is the Bay Area. So you talked about what's going on in the Democratic Party, the dynamics inside that about messaging. So my question is, given the Bay Area, when you talk about the dynamics of the so-called Sanders wing versus the old wing, or whatever you want to call it, because that seems to be where the large part of the messaging battle is happening.
Well,
at least to those outside.
I'll be very, very short because I know, and
Yeah,
very
give
short.
everybody else a
We'll
chance.
know soon, and these primaries come through. Look at if the indivisibles and the resistance and all these new post-2016 groups, you'll have their slate. They either won or lost in the Democratic primaries.
And furthermore, do they win in a general election after being dragged to the left in a lot of districts
Right. But that would be-
they
yes.
can't, building on what Lynn said, which is 100% right, can they win? For example, in Pennsylvania last night, many people posited that the Democratic candidate couldn't have won if he was in a competitive Democratic primary. So
But we'll
both of
know.
those dynamics are very
And
real.
so you
And
will have an answer very soon as
they're
the
just not,
primaries roll
what
out.
Lynn is saying, there's not a big enough sample size, which is,
Yeah,
is
well,
right.
so-
Yeah.
One of the ways I've been describing this for the last couple of months is that in Washington, there are really sort of two different parties going on right now. One are the congressional candidates trying to win back the majority in 2018. And in order to do that, they have to win in places that, Trump won by 19 to 20 points. The John Testers of the world, who is by just about every measure, boy, he's like a really solid progressive guy. Buzz cut, 300-pound farmer from
Half
Big
a finger.
Sandy. Yeah, two fingers on his left hand from a farming accident. But he voted for the rollback of Dodd-Frank provisions today, as did a bunch of other people who are up in 2018. And, that's not a popular position. But they think in order to win those seats, they have to take some votes and take some positions that are not in line with the Sanders wing. But winning back these majorities are really important for Democrats if they're going to be that check on Trump. In the 2020 campaign for the presidential primary, I don't think you'll see. I think you will see that the drift is much more closer to that Sanders wing.
Right, and California, because you have a unique voting thing, you may end up just with Democrats in the general running against Democrats, right?
Yeah. Because the jungle primary. Yeah.
Okay. Last question.
Do you see any possibility that the kids' movement, the kids' activities today and whatever is in another 10 days will have any impact on the government?
Yeah, I kind of talked about that earlier. I do think it's having a real impact, and it's keeping it alive. They're going to have this big march in Washington. I'm presuming that is going to be a really big effort. They've gotten funding from a lot of groups. But this is going to be a long, slow process, and I just think this is something that's going to be solved electorally, right? That you're going to have to change the makeup of the Congress and get more leverage that way. But these kids seem really great. I mean, they're really articulate. I used to work.
They're old enough that they
can vote. Some of them.
Yeah.
I worked in Broward County. It was one of my first jobs, and there's an actual culture there that goes back of gun control. Broward County back in the 80s enacted one of the toughest waiting periods in the country. So I do think it has an impact, but it's going to be a slow process. And there's just a lot more. We'll see what happens in this election, because there seems to be a lot more energy among young voters that we haven't seen. They did work for Obama. It worked that way. But you see issues like net neutrality. I mean, I've got kids in college. Net neutrality, gun control, intolerance. These are issues that really resonate. And so if these younger voters in colleges, it's kind of the great white whale for politicians. If we can get these kids to vote, we're going to win. It never really sort of works out. They're on a big college campus.
Let me quickly though address. I think the Parkland kids are maybe. Let me just make that separate than whether a youth vote turnout. A reason These kids are so effective. They're old enough to speak. They're not like the kids in Sandy Hook who are too young. And because they have not voted yet, there's no voting record. You can't do Oppo research on them. If you look at the things that usually people who emerge as spokesmen, they can't be attacked because they haven't made donations, they haven't voted, and even though they kind of appear Democratic leaning to me just as an observer, you can't say that yet because they haven't done anything. This is a very interesting group of potential political voices because they can't be dirtied up until maybe in time they will. Remember there was the thing that they were the fake actor thing? They got through that because they're smarter than the people who are trying to manipulate them on social media. So I would say keep an eye on them and see what they do with what they have.
Just one quick point that one Republican said to me, I still go home every weekend, and many of my colleagues do, to barbecues and picnics where my constituents are wearing guns, and they get mailers every week from the NRA. It's not about the donations as much as that the NRA is just so politically active in so many of these districts. And I go home every weekend, and I feel like my position on guns, as a Republican saying it to me, is reaffirmed every weekend. And my constituents in the Republican Party that's very heavily rooted and based in the South, they feel like they are going home and their opinion is being reaffirmed and reaffirmed. So yes, they see a lot of these marches, and many people tell all of us that yes, this is a turning point, and we feel like the politics are shifting. But remember, 2 of their colleagues have been, one was shot in the head and one was shot on a field during a baseball practice that was like seen as the beacon of bipartisanship in DC, the softball game, and nothing happened. So I'm just saying that as a
point. You have to change.
Yeah,
you have to change the
exactly right. You have to change. It's an electoral issue.
The
if
other,
you want that change.
Speaking of electoral issue, I think the one thing we did not mention tonight, which I think is the great energy that has been unleashed in response to Trump's election, is the power of women and the number of women candidates running.
And post Harvey Weinstein. I think we're in a totally different political and cultural moment now than we were actually before the election. And I think that's why you're seeing the Stormy Daniels thing have such staying power, and the whole Me Too movement, and it's really, really having a big impact.
Maureen, you're right. I mean, look at the velocity of the Parkland movement, Me Too, and Time Out.
Yeah. I mean, that's a whole
and the number of women who are running for election.
Record numbers.
And it broadens the whole conversation. And I'm pretty sure we're going to see the effects of that in the next election.
Yeah, the gender gap. I keep calling this a gender gap election. There's a huge gender gap with Trump and the Republicans. I mean, it's just huge. And it's really going to be a major factor. I would keep an eye on.
Okay, we've got people leaving now.
Okay, all right.
We got it.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. We're all going to the Golden Squirrel, which Jake is part owner of.